The latest census data is in, and there are more millennials than anyone else right now. What does that mean for you and buying a home? Millennials are anyone born between 1981 and 1996. That makes the youngest millennial 26. And that also makes the oldest millennial 41. 41 is a pretty special number when it comes to buying a home. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So what that means is that we now have an explosion of people wanting to buy a home in the market. Because we have millennials, who are the oldest of which are 41 years old, entering the housing market or buying their second home in a housing market that is already marked by scarcity. With 72.1 million millennials, that means there's a lot of competition when you go to buy a home.
Great.
Oh, no, it went okay. It did, but there's a lot of competition.
Yeah, we know there's a lot of competition, but
Amber, I can't come to school. That's a lot of competition out there.
There must be a lot of competition for that corner.
As of July 2022, about 47.9% of millennials are homeowners. That translates to about 34.5 million homeowners who are millennials. That means that 52.1% of millennials are not homeowners and therefore are not building wealth the way that their parents and grandparents did. The oldest millennials are entering a higher phase of job security. That usually means higher salaries too. And with a higher salary comes either a bigger house or, for some, their first house. COVID-19 pushed a lot of millennials to buy their first home or to buy a bigger home so they would have more space because they were working from home. The only impediment to this idea of buying a new home has really just been a lack of supply. With a lack of supply, we've seen prices really shoot through the roof. Over the last 2 years in Salt Lake City alone, we've had 30% increases year over year. That's priced a lot of people out of the market, but for some people, with their newer salaries at a higher price point, it makes a lot of sense to buy a home. One of the other factors that really pushed that demand through the roof was the knowledge that at some point after the pandemic, the Fed was going to have to raise interest rates. Because it's easy to forget that the Fed kept the interest rates really low because during the pandemic we wanted to be sure that we had as much economic activity as is humanly possible. With shutdowns and a lot of people out of work, the economy fell off a cliff. Sometimes we forget that that's what happened, but really that's what happened, and it created something of a craze for people to get into a home before 3% interest rates were gone, probably forever. The average interest rate over the last 40 years has been about 7%. Of course, with higher interest rates, we absolutely expect to see lower demand on housing, which should in turn lower prices. And with lower demand, we should see prices softening. Whether prices will actually come down in Salt Lake City remains to be seen. Most of the data at this point in November of 2022 is indicating that prices will stay steady. There will be a deceleration of prices rather than deflation of prices, meaning that prices won't go up as fast as they had been going up, rather than actually going down. So going up less fast, not going down. So the real question becomes, are there enough homes for millennials? And the short answer is no. Well, with the pandemic, housing starts slowed way down. We had shutdowns, we had supply chain disruption, a lot more demand.
So, let me ask you, any thoughts on the competition?
And now we have a competition!
I have a competition in me.
We had a lot of millennials trying to buy their first home or move up so that they could have space to work from home, or to get into a home before interest rates jumped from 3% to 6, 7, 8%. The other factor that really pushed demand is the fact that we had boomers moving down from their bigger homes into smaller homes, which happen to also be the same homes that any millennial would want for their first home. If you've seen any of my other videos, maybe you've seen that boomers and millennials want the same homes very often. They want walkable communities. They want engaged communities. They want green. They like ex-urban. They like smaller homes that have nicer features. But the truth is that even before the pandemic hit, we had a real housing shortage going. CNBC did a study and found that even before the pandemic hit, we had about 5 million homes shortage. A lot of that came from 2008 and what happened there. After the financial crash, builders were chasing all of the home sales, and they built and built and built, and really they were left holding the bag when everything came tumbling down. At that point, many builders were pushed out of the business, and ever since then they've been a little bit shy to get building the way that they had been building before that. Right now, what we have are markets that are in flux. Interest rates have gone up, prices are coming down a little bit. No one really knows where those interest rates are going to end up. Right now, we're pushing 7% on interest rates. 6 months ago, 3.25% was really a very standard interest rate. So that's had a big effect on what's going on in the market. We're all kind of waiting to see what's going to happen, what's going to come out of it. But the data that I'm reading is showing that we can absolutely expect home prices to keep going up, just not so much as they did during the pandemic. We're getting back to normal, really, is what's happening. As you can see with the Fed graph, home prices have only really gone up. Even in 2008, when home prices went down for a short period of time, if you compare to 2010, say, with 2000, home prices are still much higher in 2010 than they were in 2000. As you can see from this graph about historic rates, interest rates at 7%, it's a pretty standard interest rate. I would say in 2005 or so, an average interest rate was about 5 or 6%, both from what I remember and then also from the data that I've looked at recently. I wouldn't be surprised if we ended up somewhere around 5 or 6% once the demand on homes is brought down by the higher interest rates that the Fed is applying. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't quite get right about the Fed raising interest rates is that it's not quite that the Fed raises interest rates, which raises mortgage rates. It's more like the Fed raises interest rates and that affects the mortgage bond market, and that affects interest rates. So there's sort of an imprecise connection between the Fed raising interest rates and mortgage rates at large. But they are connected in a certain way. So let's talk about how to get started in 5 steps. The first step, which is really a fairly obvious step that a lot of people know all about, and that is a budget. You absolutely want to start with a budget. You want to know what your income looks like, what your expenses are like, where you're comfortable making a mortgage payment every month. And likely, you've been paying rent, so you have a pretty good idea of where you're comfortable with your own price point. Still, it makes a lot of sense to have your numbers in order before you talk to a professional lender and they tell you what they think you can afford, because often lenders will do their very best to tell you exactly how much you can afford. And sometimes that means that you might want to afford a little bit less than the lender's telling you you are able to afford. Step number 2. After you've got your credit score accounted for, you know where that's at and it's in good shape, and you've got a budget all figured out, then you want to go get pre-approved by a lender. A lender will pre-approve you to tell you exactly how much you can afford in your budget for a mortgage. A pre-approval is really a letter that just says the bank is willing to lend you this much money if the circumstances you've described yourself to be in to the bank doesn't change at all. So it's kind of a contingent letter saying you can borrow this much for this. You can borrow this much for a home. A pre-approval is a very important step. Often I have people who would like to go shopping with me before they've gotten a pre-approval. And I absolutely understand. It's really fun to look at homes. And we're excited. We want to go see what we can get into. But without that pre-approval, there's nothing we can do to get you into the home. Because every seller is going to want to know that you are able to buy the home that you are making an offer on. So without that pre-approval letter, it's a non-starter. The other good reason to getting pre-approved before you start shopping is that it's really nice to know what your budget actually looks like. It's good to know if we're shopping above or below where you can actually afford a home, because we don't want to shop above what you can afford, right? It is not, I do not like to break hearts. That is not my favorite thing at all. A pre-approval just means that you're not going to have your heart broken when you fall in love with a home and it's gone by the time you talk to the bank and find out how much they're willing to lend you. It's always a good idea to get pre-approved. Even if you're not going to buy for a few months, but you know you're going to, it's a great idea to get the ball rolling. If you get pre-approved and you don't go shopping for, usually it's 2 months a pre-approval will be good for, you can always go back to the lender and tell them this is all the same or this one thing's different, and they can give you a new pre-approval. Step number 3. Get a realtor. It makes a great deal of sense to get a realtor involved in the process at this point. It might feel early because you're not ready to get into the exact home that you want. However, realtors do this all the time. They are very able to help guide you. They can direct you, they can help you develop a strategy and help you get where you want to go. And most realtors have that goal in mind, getting you where you want to go for the least amount of money, and so you don't miss any homes that you would have otherwise missed. It's very important to me that all of my clients walk away super happy, because a lot of my business comes from people being happy about what I've done for them. It's also a really good idea to get a realtor right now in this phase of the process, because you want to know that the person you're working with is someone that you like and that you click with. Because when emotions run really high and you're feeling a little bit stressed out, that's an awful time to find out that you communicate in a way that's different from the way that your realtor communicates. It's a really good idea to get a realtor involved in the third step of this process. Another reason it's good to get a realtor at this point is that they can help guide you as to what's realistic for you and what's not. They know the market, they know what homes are selling for, and what those homes have in terms of benefits, features, price reductions, where they were put on the market, how much they sold for, if they came off the market. They are professional negotiators. They do it every day. So you want to trust your realtor, and building that trust before you're in the hot seat makes a lot of sense. While a realtor can do a lot for you in terms of guidance, there are a few things that it really is up to you to do. One of those things would be being very realistic about what it is that you want and what it is that you need, and the difference between the two. What can you do without, and what must you absolutely have? It's a good idea to have those listed right up front so that you know every time you go into a house whether those things are there. A lot of people want to buy a house on a feeling, and having that list in order really helps that feeling get very clear for people.
Your Uncle Rico made it very clear how you feel about me.
What?
That is very clear.
I want to be very sober right at this moment. I want to be very clear.
I'm trying to get you what you want.
I told you it was over, and I thought I made myself very clear.
Step number 4. Step number 4. Step 4. Be cool-headed. There will always be another really great home. I know it doesn't feel like it in the moment, but there are always a bounty of amazing homes to find, and your realtor will help you find exactly the right one for you. So, being cool-headed means not rushing into a purchase because your feelings are very, very high. Whenever you buy a home in a hurry, that's a recipe for regret. Studies have shown that there have been a lot of regretful people post-pandemic in their purchase. I like to think of it as rush equals regret. And that seems to bear out fairly often. You want to watch the market and see everything that's coming on and coming off and what prices are looking like, what the features and benefits are. Chances are you're already doing this online. But you really want to trust your instincts. You definitely want to trust your agent, so make sure you trust the agent that you're working with. And another thing to consider is that hot markets often mean multiple offers. And when there are multiple offers, that also means that you don't get every home that you put an offer in on. So, being clear-headed and patient can be a huge benefit. Step number 5, close the deal. Follow-through is imperative on the home that you love, that's in the right budget, it's got the features and benefits that you're looking for. Let's talk about how to close the deal, what that process looks like. Because it's an opaque process unless you've done this before. That process goes like this. You make an offer, that offer is accepted. Once that offer is accepted, you're going to want to keep a couple of things in mind. First, you need to get your earnest money in within the first 4 days of going under contract in the state of Utah. Second, you will have seller disclosures coming at you. Those seller disclosures are going to tell you everything the seller knows that's good, bad, and ugly about the house. Everything they've fixed, everything they know about. They're a fantastic resource to help you know that you're buying the kind of home that works best for you. Then, third, we're going to do buyer due diligence, in which we get an inspection of the home done by a professional who can tell us all the ins and outs of the home that you can't see with your own bare eyes as a buyer. That report is going to be incredibly useful to help us decide whether you want to get out of the contract, whether you'd like concessions from the seller to fix some things on the home, or the third option is that they fix the home before you get into it after having bought it. It's always good to remember, though, that there are a couple of different places where a buyer can get out of the contract. A lot of people feel concerned that they might be trapped into buying a home that they don't end up wanting if they make an offer on it, and that's just not the case. The next step after you've gotten an offer accepted is going to be your finance and appraisal deadline. That's basically the deadline by which the bank is going to have sent someone out to do an appraisal to make sure that the home is worth what you're asking them to lend you on it. So they just want to know that if they give you, say, $500,000 loan for a home, that the value of the home is there, that they're not lending more than the home is worth. The other aspect there is going to be your finance deadline. That's part of the finance and appraisal deadline. That is basically the point by which you're going to have wrapped everything up with your lender. They'll have all their P's and Q's buttoned down, because up until now, it's all been kind of a loose approximation of what your situation will be, mostly because they don't have an actual home that you're telling them that you would like to buy. So they're using a hypothetical home until now in the process. And then the last point is going to be your settlement. Settlement is when you sign the papers and say I do for your house, essentially.
Of course I do.
Yes, I do.
Who says I haven't?
I do.
Yes, I do.
Yes, sir, I do.
Once you sign the paperwork at settlement for your home, Then your title or escrow agent will contact the county to record the deed. That also entails funding happening from your lender of choice to the seller. Once you've funded and recorded, the home is yours. It's time to go get the keys. So, don't forget to seal the deal. It's very important to follow through on the home that you love. But based on everything I've seen in the last 2 years through this market, millennials really have found their footing when it comes to buying a home. Many millennials are entering that phase of their life where their career is very solid and their income matches the kind of home that they would like to have. So I would expect to see that 52 and a little bit more percent of millennials really pursuing home buying in the next few years. That's going to entail going up against higher interest rates for sure, but prices will also be a little softer. That's going to mean that there's more room to ask sellers for some concessions. You'll have a little more time to think about the purchase you're making. You'll get to feel like you were well taken care of throughout the process, and instead of a really incredibly rushed and kind of frantic process that buying a home through the pandemic turned out to be for the last 2 years. Millennials are a generation that were basically defined by the bust of 2008, the financial crash. They're also fairly defined by COVID. It's really had an outsized impact on their ability to buy a home because demand went through the roof, interest rates were kept artificially low, and now interest rates have shot up. What that means is that we'll still have a strong demand, a low supply, even though builders are trying to make up that difference. There's still going to be a shortage of homes, and interest rates are going to be a little bit higher. That's going to have sort of a kind of a squeezing effect where interest rates going up gives buyers a little bit of power, but low supply gives sellers a little bit of power. So each side has a little bit of power in its own way. With the pandemic keeping rates artificially low, there's been a tremendous boom in demand. We also have a low supply, and that's going to very much impact the patterns we'll see in millennial buying in the next few years. Interest rates are going up, but that means demand softening a little bit. I think personally what I see is that a lot of boomers who would have moved previously are kind of staying put because they're saying to themselves, I don't have to move. I recognize that that's just my experience, but that's my experience nonetheless. With just a little bit more than half of millennials not owning a home, there's still lots of room for millennials to get into the market and take up market share as when it comes to buying a home. There's lots of demand, there's higher interest, lower supply, but it still remains one of the very best ways for millennials to build wealth. It's what their parents did and their parents before them too. It's really had a tremendous impact on the ability to pass generational wealth down to their kids. So, for millennials, the ability to leverage one's wealth has become more important than ever, and home buying remains one of those few places that most millennials can get a foothold in the ladder of building wealth. I hope this video has been useful to you. If you liked it, you might want to watch one of my other videos. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and watch more videos on how to get into your first home.
But don't worry, I'll come back to you in the end.
What do you mean what happened? That's the end.
Sit down! That's the end of the jokes!
And that's the end of your story.
Right to the end of the line, I think.